you mentioned obviously you do your kind of your story keys, getting your like kind of the main poses out, and then all the in betweens and all the kind of animation keys. And then you
Sure.
mentioned going down onto twos, and you said this is the shot where we animated on twos.
Yeah.
Could you just break that down and just explain what it was that you meant by that?
Yeah, sure. So essentially what I would do is I would have my key poses, and then once I've made my in-betweens, part of my process at least, I think for me what it came down to initially, why I started having this workflow, was because it's the only way you can really animate traditionally with 2D. Like pen and paper, they would animate every other frame. So that's what they mean by twos. So I kind of just inherited that process because I'm thinking I would still want to try and keep things as conventional as possible, even though we're using a new medium. So when 3D came about, I still wanted to make sure that I was doing it the way that was already working. Like, why try and fix something that's not broken? So that's kind of my mindset. So I'm kind of, I'll quickly do, I'll just
adding in more.
Now. So let's just, I thought it'd be easier to try and show you than it is to try and explain it. So here you go.
But it's a case of trying to have as much control over a piece as possible, really, isn't it?
Yes.
Rather than giving up anything to chance.
Yes, exactly.
Doesn't necessarily mean that it's every other frame.
Yeah.
Or over, but it's just like kind of chucking in as much kind of detail as you can as an artist creating that shot.
Yes, 100%. So the way I guess I'm half joking when I say this, and also not joking, but I'm also, when it comes to computers and art, I'm also quite stubborn. So basically, my other concept behind it was I don't want the computer telling me how I want to make something. So by putting it down on twos, there's less interpretation for the computer, even though sometimes it actually works better when the computer does do it for you. But just for my peace of mind, I still keep everything consistently every 2 frames, just so that way that gives me reassurance that I've made that conscious decision to put that on that frame, as opposed to the computer telling me, is this what you thought? So essentially, if we've got these 2 keys here, and then I'll add in it.
You don't see your screen.
Yeah, they share your screen again.
Oh, is it gone? Let's try again. Sorry about that, guys. Can you see now?
Yep.
Okay, cool. Sorry. So let's say I've got, there you go, I've got, let's favor that in. So let's say this is my breakdown, and then I want to anticipate, so I'm going to anticipate that down to go up. And then I'll just add in like another 6 frames or something. And then that's going to be my new end pose. And then I'll just add in an overshoot. So essentially I've got my main keys here. Now what I'll do is I'll start to add in-betweens every 2 frames. Assuming I've kept this even. Have I kept this even?
That's it.
That's with Tween Machine.
Yeah, exactly. This is using Tween Machine.
It's kind of like it's every key that kind of makes sense within the 2 to 3 sort of key ratios.
Yeah, exactly. So just go through. So that's what I mean by keeping it on 2s. For some reason, that's gone weird. Oh, it's this. I don't know what I've done there. Let's have a look.
Live demos, man. Live demos.
Yeah. What have I done?
Nightmare.
It never works as expected.
Yeah. It's that classic thing of, this is one I did earlier, and then doesn't work.
Yeah.
But this, essentially, this is how I would work.
I had a question around that.
Sure.
Am I audible? So like on every 2 frames, but does it affect the spacing? Like I'll have more spacing if I want the speed more. So like I'm going against that, right?
So I think the important thing, like there's a difference. The way I see it is if I have everything consistently on 2 frames and I'm using Tween Machine, then I am not having to think, or no, the way, basically part of my workflow is I have, let's just get a notepad. So my workflow is I use hotkeys on Tween Machine. So I use, okay, let's get WordPad because that's not going to work. I have different like preset values on Tween Machine,
Okay.
which is YUIOP. This is just my workflow. Anyone can use this if they wanted to. But from there, these would equate to different values on Tween Machine, which is kind of what I experimented with, and this is what I use for everything now. And these values is what I literally use for everything. And what, for me, basically what that does is it kind of, it takes out the concept of timing for me, because I can almost say at this moment I want it to ease in, and it can either ease in very soft or very sharp. So soft being 33%, sharp being 75%. And then from there, I only use that as a template for my general timing. And then from there, I manipulate completely everything. But the reason I do it that way is it keeps everything connected in a similar timing, but then I can offset on top of that. So I don't know if I can bring in a rig. Sorry, I know this is
I was
getting
just
to the
going to
top.
say that. Can you show that if you got
Sure.
time?
Yeah. I mean, if you guys are willing to stick around, of
I'll
course.
stick around wherever.
Yeah, because I
I
got
was going to say,
confused.
man, you're going to be
how
working
will
till
you?
midnight.
At this rate. I'll quickly show you. Am I okay
Yes.
to use Stuart Rig, Eddie?
Yeah, why not?
Yeah, go ahead.
Cool. I just wanted to check. I don't want to get in trouble for anything. Okay. So we've got lovely Stuart Rig.
We're all
Let's-
students, and it's a student rig.
Yeah, very true. Okay, so let's just whip out a quick pose. It's going to look horrendous, so don't judge me. We'll just counter his hips
Since
a
you're
bit.
talking about Richard Williams, do some really classic Richard Williams
Oh
one
God,
or something.
I'm not going to try and aim for anything too high right now.
I want to see some more Tex Avery stuff, to be honest. So yeah.
I don't know. I prefer a bit of James Baxter myself. I'll just, I can do that in 30 seconds. Right. He's waving. Hello. Cool.
I
So
see you pose the same way Bader does.
do I?
Yeah.
This
doing
is
like all rotation at the same time. Other teachers
Uh,
just use one axis at a time.
I mean, it varies. When I pose, I do a bit of both.
And Bader says that that's nonsense to use one axis at a time. It takes too long. And also actually putting your mouse pointer on the actual curves. Just push the middle mouse button and use it anywhere on screen.
I mean, I think there's no right or wrong, honestly. I would just
It's just about speed, according to him.
yeah. I think it comes down to it does literally come down to how much time you've got, how precise you need to be. If you're being super technical, and if you're talking like say feature film and visual effects, like super high end stuff, then I'd be more inclined to do it per axis and make sure that everything's going correct, like anatomically. So now I'm just making up some of a random pose.
Another thing I was thinking about making poses when you have a semi close up or whatever, there you don't see the full body. they say you can ignore the feet or arms that are not in screen. But what happens when you
No.
render?
No. Well, I mean, not necessarily. Yes, that's true. Not necessarily just because when you render, but also because. Sorry, I'm trying to think as I animate. I think it should, like, you're just going to notice it. There's something about it that's going to feel wrong, and you need to always animate the legs. If someone says to you, don't animate the legs if they're not in screen, it's, excuse my French, but it's a bunch of bollocks.
They say it's enough to animate the hips, what the leg should have been doing.
I think you should animate everything correctly. Like I say, with key poses, everything should feel correct. Right, so we've got 2 poses, probably not the best ones in the world, but nevertheless, we've got 2 poses. Both hands on hips. You can't get any more cliche, but it's fine. So we got hey, and he goes over here.
Mm-hmm.
So now I grab the whole rig, and let's say I'm going to anticipate. Well, let's do my breakdown first. So my breakdown, I'm going to hit 50. Let's ease in. So I've hit 0, so now it's gone to 33. You can see on there, well, it says 30 actually. I lied, it's 30. But anyway, so in here, now this is my template. Let's do something stupidly cartoony. So in here, I'm going to keep that leg where it was. I'm going to bend that down.
That means 30% of the previous pose, right?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
No, that'd be 30% of the second pose, because I'm easing in. If I was going to be favoring the first pose, it'd be minus 30.
Okay.
So let's say that's trailing. We could trail that hand back too, and then we could swing this arm round. Maybe we could change the volume a bit. So in here, we could bend that. This isn't this isn't my workflow anymore, but if I'm doing something fast, I could do it this way. Oh, this looks terrible. But you get the general idea. Let's bring the neck forward.
Dude, you're posing on the spot. This is
know.
Good stuff. Don't put yourself down.
Okay, so let's say that's my breakdown. Now, if I wanted to anticipate, now I'm going to hit Y, because that's minus 75. So now I'm easing out. So now I can counter that. So even though I'm easing out, I'm now changing the weight of the character, but everything else is still easing out. And from there, I can build a new pose. But the point I'm making is, by doing it this way, every part of the body is still moving a tiny, tiny bit, which makes a difference. So now, let's bring it forward a bit. Thankfully, doing this Anim Jojo gives me a little more confidence, because I used to have to animate like this all the time, just live on stream. So that's my anticipation. And then from here, I can add an overshoot. So now I'm going to hit 75 in the opposite direction. So that was minus 75. That's 30. Now that's 75. But from here, I'm going to overshoot. So I'm going to take it over the top, and then it's going to settle. And then from here, I can drag the leg. So let's say we keep it dragging slightly.
This is really cool, because every time that I've done like overshoot, so okay, that and then work into those, but just having it as the 75% and making sure that not everything's in the static pose.
Yes.
Everything's still moving.
Yeah,
that
exactly.
Really, it's a different way of thinking about it, you know. So that's really cool.
Yeah, I'm glad it can help. So now, let's say we can really push that back. I'm breaking the rig a bit here, but never mind.
You have to rotate the head, I think.
Yeah. I could probably actually keep that. And I could
Is it
drag
okay to
drag ahead a
throw
bit.
out more questions while
Yeah,
we
of
still
course.
have you here?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So here,
I have a question about the main controller under every character.
Uh-huh.
Should we move that or not? Because I've been taught that that should just stay in place, but is that just for games?
So I do key every control, but what I try to do now,
Like
now that
when
I'm,
the character traverse, you never move the main controller.
oh, this.
Animate them away from it.
Yeah. So I never move the global. We call that the global control, usually.
Main or global.
Yeah.
Because
so-
I've seen Vader again move that a lot, especially when he jumps and flips and stuff, and that makes
Yeah.
it so much easier.
It does, but there's also downsides to using it, and especially when you're on a production, the main reason you shouldn't touch that is because if you need to restage your character, if they want them to go to the very far back of the scene, then you can literally just grab one control, move it all back, and you've still got all your animation.
Yeah.
Whereas you're gonna have to tweak a lot if you're animating. And so usually what you end up doing is you have secondary controls under. So this is the main, then you'd have another one which does the same thing, but underneath it, which gives you the ability to use a control, but still have another one free to use for restaging. Me personally, it depends what I'm doing. So with quadruped stuff, what I tend to do is I'll animate the root like this, and all the limbs would be in chest and hip space, so they're completely locked. And I'll get my main timing on my root, and I'll just bounce them along like la 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 la. And then from there, I use locators to rebake all of that animation onto the individual hips and chest, and then I'll delete the root animation, and then I've still got all that animation, but now it's on the chest and hips, and then I can use those to offset them and give them separate timing.
Now
And
we're
then-
in Richard Leaco territory.
Sorry?
Now we're in Richard Leaco territory.
Yes, exactly like Richard
Locators and
Leaco.
baking,
Yeah.
base switching.
Yep. I mean, this is what I mean. There's a difference between like animating well and animating smart, and I think they're two separate skills, and I think like some of the best animators in the world can do both. Because it's one thing to animate well, and it's also one animate efficiently and like simplifying things. Like if you have to overcomplicate your shot to sell an idea, then you're probably not making the best choices. If you can do something super simple and everything comes across and everything reads and communicates, then I think it's going to become more powerful. So, I mean, this is very cartoony, but you know, like if you look at some of my stuff that I might have done more recently, you'll notice that it's much more subtle, and I haven't had to make broad gestures in order to sell an idea because you can convey a lot just through the eyes. So now I'm going to keep my foot on the ground, for example, and then I'm going to shift the weight across. So you can see, like, even though I'm using everything on the template timing, I'm still changing everything on top to separate it all. So I can change the head direction. And I can still, if I wanted to, I can still use like my hotkeys to favor left or right on top of those, you know? So in here, maybe I still want to favor that pose, even though the rest of it's going on easing out. Maybe that one's easing in. I can still use my hotkeys to separate that up. So just because I'm using, this is what I mean by like, I'm thinking less about my timing and more about my spacing, because I've almost predetermined some of my timing by using set values on Tween Machine. All it's a matter of is how where do I place that key in my timeline, and that's what determines my timing. But my spacing should already be correct because I'm using Tween Machine, if I've done it correctly. The only downside to this process is when you go into polish, you have a lot of keys, and not everything's going to be clean. So as you can see at the bottom here, I use ATools or Animbot, whichever one you have, doesn't really matter. And you can use ease in and out sliders to get a whole chunk of keys, and you can clean the tangent. So you get the idea anyway in my process. So let's say I had a cube, and then there, let me see there, and now let's just give it a ton of keys. Now, if I go into my graph editor, you see we've got this tangent now. Now using ATools, I can slide that in and out and clean my curve, which is super useful. Like when I discovered this, I was like, this is amazing. So I could actually create a breakdown now. So that's my new breakdown. I could just ease everything out and then ease that in. And now we've created a different tangent. And this is how I clean up my work. And it's something that I try to do. I try not to use every control now. Like I try to, again, animate smart and try and get as much animation as I can on as few controls as possible. So I used to, when I was in TV animation, I used to animate with the chest in IK. So I would move it around like this, which is, when you think about it, anatomically completely incorrect. The way you should use it, if I zero out this rig, is using FK. If I use FK, this is how, you got a spine. This is how, when you bend, this is how your body works. And by doing it this way, you get 3 arcs going down the body and you don't lose volume. Whereas if I move down here and do that and then bend it, the chances are, even though this curve may look correct, that in my in-between is going to lose volume because I'm going to have to create that arc myself. And it requires so much more time to try and clean up that arc when I could be getting it for free using FK. So that's something that I reached out to Twitter not that long ago, asking loads of animators online, like, who uses FK? Pretty much all of them in feature film were like, yep, FK, FK, FK. And I was like, oh God, that's where I've been going wrong for years. And so I tried it and I was like, this is amazing. It makes so much more sense now. And it just makes it so much more easier to like offset certain parts of the body. If you think about it from like an actual tangible human being, when we twist our body, it kind of works in an FK joint. And so you can offset things a lot easier that way. And so it's just breaking it down piece by piece. And I think that makes a big difference. So like workflow, especially workflow isn't, I would say like your workflow needs to be suited for fast things when you're in TV, because you have a lot to churn out, like anywhere between 8 to 12 seconds a day. But when you get to like higher quality stuff like movies, it's all about making it anatomically correct, believable, plausible. Everything has to feel like it's, real, like something that you would believe in. So that's when you have to start actually think about my workflow, not from how fast can I make this, but what's going to be the most tangible way of applying everything to make it a convincing performance. So workflow changes completely. And that's something I've adjusted to in the last couple of years when I've moved to higher quality stuff. It's I had to rework my whole workflow while still trying to maintain the bits that made my TV stuff good to begin with. So I still use Tween Machine and on twos to this day for everything I do. Like I'm currently working on a shot which is 460 frames and it's all on twos. And that's 2 characters as well. So like it looks like very overwhelming on a timeline, but because I'm so used to that workflow and I've narrowed it down to what I feel is most streamlined for me, like it doesn't feel as intimidating as it looks to me anymore.
Do you also keep the arms in IK for the most part?
Depends. For now, that's actually another big workflow thing that I've changed. So I'm doing it what makes the most logical sense now, whereas if a hand is going to interact with another object, then obviously IK.
Yeah.
If it's not and they're free flowing, then it makes more sense to have them in FK, because that's how your arm works. You know, it's a joint that goes from another joint, etc.
I know we get free arcs when we do FK arms, but I find it so hard to make them do what I want.
Yes, it is
wobbling
difficult.
about a lot.
Yeah, it takes. I think the thing that's the trickiest part about using FK is that your forearm, so like your upper arm moves in every axis, but then your forearm only moves in one axis essentially.
One axis, and then you can twist the wrist.
Yes, and then you twist the wrist. So like getting your head around how you can lead an action through the upper arm, which then creates like, you know, the arc sends the, you know, the mechanic you're going for in the forearm is something that takes a lot of like thinking.
Just an arm swing in a walk in FK. Okay, you set 3 keys and you have your swing, but then you need to move in and out as well. So if you trace the wrist is going to be an 8 or the infinity symbol. So you have to adjust the upper arm to make that happen. And sounds easy, but it's not as easy as it sounds.
No, it's very difficult. I completely relate to you, don't worry.
But if you do it in IK, then you have to have like 15, 16, maybe 20 keys to do the same thing.
Yep. Yeah, it's true. That's where like workflow definitely comes into practice. And it's just something you have to keep trying until you get something that comes natural to you.
And that's what I meant when I talked to you earlier of this stream, that I get bogged down with too many keys too early.
Yeah, it's difficult. The way I would try and think about it is try and think about it in key poses and then think about your in-betweens later. Because the more you flesh out that way, so if you think about your key poses, then you'll break down your anticipation and your overshoot. Once you've got those 5 keys down, then that's going to flesh out, that's going to determine quite a lot of your in-betweens. At least if you've done those keys properly, then you should be like, okay, to fix this, to have this intention, this bit has to be at this point. And it kind of already like simplifies all those things for you.
And we can continue this off stream.
Yeah, you get it anyway. Otherwise going on a tangent.
Yeah. So on that note, I'm going to wrap it up, but I'll give you one more question.
Sure.
And that is there any advice for, I guess, students or animators who are trying to break in, trying to reach the next level, trying to reach their goals?
Sure.
What bit of advice would you give them before you head off?
I think one of the most important things is, like, we all have, I think it's something that you got to have something that feels like that you personally connect with, and not try and inherit something that someone else has made, because that's something that's like more genuine to them. Like to come out with, let's say I'm talking about like a pose or like a performance. I see a lot of people trying to copy others, and I feel like that doesn't necessarily, like what people look for in animators is someone that can bring something different and something that's like come from them. And that's actually what made me land my first job, is they saw potential. To be honest, my animation wasn't very good, but they saw the potential because I was pushing things that, like, to me just felt like I personally connected with. And I think they saw that, because you almost, if you can have a voice in your animation, I think that's really important, because anyone can teach you the mechanics. Like if you were learning how to like skip a rope, if you did it 500 times, eventually you're going to learn it. So it's the same way with animation. I think anyone can learn to animate like from a technical point of view in terms of execution, but I don't think anyone can like naturally come up with like a genuine performance. And I feel like that's really where an animator's voice comes out. So for me, when I'm looking for like a new upcoming animator and I can see like this person's going far, to me, it's more in their ideas and their choices and why they did things. Like there was someone animated recently, someone lifting a box, and it was just like a weight exercise. But the reason I liked it wasn't necessarily because it was animated well, but it was the idea that like he huffed up his chest, and then once he picked it up, he used his knee to nudge it up again to like keep the weight momentum. And I was like, that's a quite cool choice, just to have the knee nudge it up, because that's something you would naturally do. And so it's that kind of acting choice that I'm just like, the fact that they even thought to put that in, rather than just having someone lift something up naturally and then just walk off with it. I was just like, that's just a little something that makes it more special. So I think that's something I'd advise, is just try and think about something that you personally connect with. If you were to do something yourself, how would you do it? And bring, like, that's that extra thing that you could bring to the table that someone else might not be able to.
Sure, yep. That's a great answer. Okay, we'll have one more question from
Sure.
Shalik, and then that's it.
Okay.
Hello.
Hey,
Hey, Aaron. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. Yourself?
Yeah. So I was thinking that I saw your workflow that you had 2 key poses,
Yeah.
and then you had one in between, and then one anticipation, and then one is overshoot. Like,
Yes.
right. So this is for one shot. Like if I'm doing a 200 frames acting shot or dancing shot,
Yep.
so how can I broke those shot into these kind of phases?
Okay, so let's say you were doing a dance. I would either look at, well, I would definitely look at some reference first, assuming you've had some reference. And I would go through it frame by frame, and I'll be like, where are the key poses? And from there, once I've made those key poses, I would pin those down and say, okay, now where's my in-between? And I would think about it that way. Or even you could construct your own in-between from there. Like you've got to think from A to B, what's going to lead the action, what's going to overlap, how is the body's volume going to change, all those kinds of things. And then from there, the in-betweens will almost, like I say, once you've got those 5 things down, I'm not saying, this isn't like some miraculous workflow that's going to work every time. Like, I'm not going to, that's a disclaimer, like, it's not going to work every time. So
Yes.
I want to make that clear. Sometimes it takes a bit more work, but for the most part, in terms of my experience with it, for the most part, I feel like that workflow, using those 5 keys, gives me the majority of that, of like what's going to structure the whole animation. And I'll do that from each pose to pose, and having those 5 keys, including those 2 key poses. That's going to, that'll determine the rest of it. And then from there, obviously you can add in secondary actions and stuff like that. If you wanted a hand waving on top of a walk, that kind of thing. And that's where you can start to add in the textures later. But I feel like getting those main mechanics down comes from those 5 keys. And then you can always tweak it later using other methods and different techniques, So like you saw, I use A-Tools. That's part of my workflow to adjust things after everything's down on 2s. And it's I feel like it's a relatively efficient way to adjust things on the fly.
Cool. Thanks.
Thank you, Aaron.
Yeah, thanks for your time. Thanks for your question, everyone.
Thanks for the
yeah.
seminar.
And thanks for coming along, everyone. And thank you, Eddie, for having me on board. Like, it's been really nice to speak to everyone and share some knowledge.
No worries.
Thanks, Aaron. Thanks, Eddie.
Thanks, Aaron. Thanks.
Great, guys. And look out for the upload. I'll probably do that today. So, but again,
Awesome.
Thanks, Aaron. Thanks for your time.
No problem. I'll speak to you later.
See ya.